Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this executive of Thursday, the 2nd of September. I'm Councillor Lynn Doherty, the leader of West Berkshire Council. Before we start proceedings, I would like to explain, for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, that today's meeting is being held over both Zoom and with councillors present and COVID compliant here in the council chamber. However, the current COVID-safe capacity of the council chamber means that not all members are able to attend physically. And so for this meeting, the 9 executive members are in the council chamber, as well as myself in attendance, are the Deputy Leader, Councillor Graham Bridgman, and other members of the executive, Councillor Steve Arderwater, Councillor Dominic Bowick, Councillor Hilary Cole, Councillor Ross McKinnon, Councillor Richard Sumner, Councillor Howard Wollaston, and you'll note that Councillor Joe Stewart is also attending remotely this evening. Members of the Shadow Executive attending in person are Councillors Tony Vickers, Councillors Adrian Abbs and Councillor Eric Pattenden, and the leader of the Minority Green Party, Councillor Caroline Culver, is also attending in person. Other members of the Shadow Executive are in attendance remotely. These members are entitled to speak and ask questions when invited to do so by myself. The majority of the officers attending the meeting and members of the public asking questions at today's meeting are also doing so remotely, unless they have physically requested to be here. The meeting is being live streamed via YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Other members of the council are also in attendance in the virtual waiting room and can ask questions on any items included on the agenda. They will do this by indicating electronically, and I will then invite them to be brought in from the virtual waiting room for their questions to be answered. Members who are not on the executive are not able to vote on any of the agenda items. Please note the voting to take place at this meeting will be run on a trial basis via the use of our desktop microphones. The results of each vote will be shared on screen. The officers in attendance, either in person or remotely, include our Interim Chief Executive, Sue Halliwell, and Executive Directors, Joseph Holmes and Andy Sharp. Shiraz Sheikh will be the legal advisor to the meeting, and I'm assisted by Stephen Chard, the clerk to the meeting, and by Gordon Oliver, who will be acting as the Zoom host. Apologies, I actually think that was Jack today, not Gordon. Okay. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before I proceed? I see no hands before me, in which case we can move on to item 1 on our agenda this evening, which is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We're not aware of any apologies.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Apologies from Councillor Brooks for lateness. He is intending to be with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dillon. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Apologies from Councillor Marsh, and Councillor Masters hopes to join us but might be late.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Culver. And Councillor Bridgman.
Leader, I just question for officers about recording apologies. After all, Councillor Stewart is in the meeting, as it were, via Zoom, but she's not physically in the room. And therefore, I think for the purpose of the meeting, we should record that she isn't in the room for the purpose of voting. And I think that's important, and we need to consider that when we're looking at the way in which we record members' attendance at this meeting, at council meetings, at committee meetings, because after all, we may well have a member of the body who is unable to be in the room but wants to take part but can't vote. So I don't think it's an apology in that sense, but I just want to make sure that officers record the minutes going forward in that style.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bridgman. And I think as we move towards these hybrid meetings, that's going to become ever more important. So I'll leave that one with you, Stephen. So thank you very much for that. Okay, if we've got no more apologies, can we please move on to the minutes from the last meeting? And I'm going to ask if members are willing to accept the previous minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 15th of July 2021. I've had a look through and I am quite happy to propose them from the chair. Does that find a seconder?
I'm very happy to second them, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Therefore, can I ask executive members to indicate by voting on their microphone if they agree that minutes can be signed as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting? And you should have on your microphone a yes, abstain, or no on your screen. Please, members of the public, bear with us. This is a new thing we're trialling this evening. They're all going well. We've got everybody who hasn't voted is Councillor Howard Wollaston. Are you voting? Not according to the list in front of me. There we go. And seat 30. Do I ignore that?
Ignore seat 30.
Pardon?
Ignore seat 30.
Ignore
So
seat
I'm
30.
just trying to share the screen. I can say that there's a unanimous approval to that. I'm just having a sharing screen issue. So I'll have that sorted by the time we get to the main items.
Okay.
No trouble.
Thank you. Very, very slick, I must say. So thank you. We'll look forward to trying that out further. Councillor Burke.
Leader, I noticed that we're not looking at the same screen on our machines as we are on the display.
No, Stephen, as Clark's just explained, he's having difficulty sharing that, but he'll work it out for the next one.
Okay, so next time then the members of the public will be able to see that.
That's the intent.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on then to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest for this evening? Councillor Bowick? That's an old hand. In which case we can move to item 4 on our agenda this evening, which is public questions. So first of all, I'd like to thank all the members of the public that have submitted questions for this evening's executive meeting, and welcome those of you able to be in attendance to hear the answers to your question and to ask a supplementary question if you have one. For those public questioners unable to join this meeting, I can confirm that you will receive a written response to your questions within 5 clear working days of the meeting. Please note that in accordance with the new processes, you will not need to say, I ask the question standing in my name. Your question will appear on screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but please remember that this must be to clarify the response provided and not to introduce any new business. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questions have more than one question only, their first question will be answered. If, after all other questions have been asked and answered, and there is sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note that the time limit for public questions is restricted to 30 minutes. And if your questions have not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days. The responses given either verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the Council's website in due course. Therefore, I understand that both Mr. Ian Hall and Mr. Vaughan Miller have confirmed they're unable to attend the meeting, and they will receive written responses to their questions this evening. So could I please invite Mr. Nigel Foote, who I believe is in attendance, to join us in the chamber so that we can answer his question A. Is Mr. Nigel Foote able to join us in the chamber?
I can see him out there. Nobody seems to have told him out there, though.
Is there somebody out there? Councillor Bowick, could I ask you to answer Mr. Foote's question A on the agenda this evening? Once that question's been answered, Mr. Foote, you will have the right to ask a supplementary question.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Foote, which raises an important point. You ask what Council is doing to provide structured activities for our young people. Of course, during term time.
Councillor Bowick, have you got your mic on?
Thank you, Councillor. During term time, it is our schools who provide such activities, which includes access to green spaces for many. But we recognise that for many families, holiday periods are even more difficult than usual as they struggle to keep their children occupied, well-fed and safe. I hope, Councillor Foote, that you've been able to see a copy of today's Newbury Weekly News, which published a letter from me where I expand at length on some of the things that we've been doing to support our young people in these difficult times. Government provided funding for local authorities across the country for holiday activities and food programmes that were piloted over the Easter break. I was pleased that the funding was extended to allow us to provide 16 days over the summer break when hundreds of eligible children and young people were able to enjoy exciting activities and nutritious meals. We did this by working with schools and partners such as Berkshire Youth, Community Youth Project and holiday club providers across West Berkshire, not just in Newbury. It has been hugely successful and we will be running the programme again over Christmas. We have also provided day trips and other activities for some children and young people who are more vulnerable and who access specialist services such as children in care and young carers. We know that children and young people have suffered due to the restrictions brought in to curb the spread of coronavirus, as does government. And to address this, the Department for Education has put together a huge package of support for teachers and pupils across the country, with over £3 billion being made available to fund a range of measures, and that includes over £400,000 here in West Berkshire. I understand that ministers are also considering how outdoor learning can be included as part of the Department for Education's recovery plan, so that all children can experience the benefits of learning together and gaining new skills in an outdoor environment. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor?
I do have a short supplementary, and that is, could you give me an assurance that that funding, the extra funding as a result of the COVID pandemic and things, will be carried forward by this council in future school holidays in the years to come? Thank you.
Well, the funding comes from government. And we're dependent, of course, on the government for funding. But I can assure you that certainly in the future, the government have already committed to extending this programme to Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foote. Can we move on to question C then on our agendas, which is Mr. William Beard, who I understand is attending remotely, to ask the question C on the agenda to Councillor Ross McKinnon. So over to you, Councillor McKinnon.
Is Mr. Beard in attendance?
Yeah.
Mr.
Beard is.
Yeah, he's
virtual.
Thank you, Mr. Beard, for that excellent question. Allow me to give you as comprehensive an answer as I can. In 2019, the UK became the first major economy to adopt a legal commitment to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. To support this, the government commercial function has developed a new commercial policy measure for all central government departments and arm's length bodies. In June of this year, the Cabinet Office further published a procurement policy note, taking account of carbon reduction plans, is the title of it, which is to be deployed in the procurement of major government contracts. Now, essentially, this measure requires suppliers bidding for major contracts to commit to achieving net zero by 2050 to publish a carbon reduction plan. Now, this policy note only applies when procuring goods and services or works with an anticipated contract value above £5 million per annum, that's excluding VAT, which are subject to the Public Contracts Regulations of 2015, say where it wouldn't be related and proportionate to the contract. Now, that central government policy note relates to framework agreements and dynamic purchasing systems only, so it's quite restrictive, and will be applied to relevant procurements advertised on or after 30th September 2021. Now, locally, West Berkshire Council's Commissioning and Procurement Service are working with colleagues in the energy team to develop our local plans to implement this policy note in West Berkshire for all relevant procurements. Now, these plans will make provision for how procurement processes will account for the need for bidding suppliers for council work to provide information on their carbon reduction work, how this will be validated and evaluated, and what measures will be used to assess the performance of suppliers against those commitments as part of our contract management. Progress on that work will be captured as part of our own internal reporting to our procurement board. In addition, a new social value policy will be adopted in West Berkshire in the autumn of this year. This policy will ensure consideration is given in all procurements to the potential to derive environmental, social and economic benefits. There's a particular focus on making the best of the many opportunities that exist in all of our third-party spend to innovate and generate environmental benefits in support of the delivery of our new environment strategy. This social value policy sets out how service requirements should be procured to take into account the environmental outcomes set out in our West Berkshire overall council strategy and our environment strategy. The policy has identified 5 key areas for consideration in the procurement processes. First, reducing carbon emissions to help achieve carbon neutrality by 2030 and beyond. Second, seeking to reduce air pollution or eliminate where possible. Third, contributing to the protection, restoration and enhancement of our natural environment. Fourthly, resource efficiency and up-to-date processes for reuse and recycling. And finally, encouraging local innovation and skills to help tackle climate change in the district. This new policy is due to come to the meeting of the executive in November. So I hope you found that answer comprehensive, and I thank you once again for a very pertinent and relevant question. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Beard?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. I thought it was a very comprehensive answer. Could I just ask, where the council makes a decision, either to accept or reject like a contract on the basis of perhaps a lack of a carbon reduction plan, will you be publishing any of those decisions, putting them in the public domain in any way, shape or form? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Beard, for that. That's a good question, although we haven't quite fully decided how to implement that policy yet, so I can't give you a yes or no answer, subject to the sort of the overall commitment for transparency in all major areas. But I don't think I can go any further than that. But thanks once again.
Thank you both. Can I therefore, I think we've got Mr. Simon Pike with us virtually, and can I ask Councillor Richard Sumner to ask question D submitted from Mr. Simon Pike?
Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Councillor Pike, for your question. Upon completion of any works within the public highway, the Section 278 process involves a maintenance period. This period is usually 12 months and is a period of time that gives the developer and their contractor time to remediate any defects in the works that might appear. Upon the completion of the maintenance period, council engineers would make a final inspection of the works. Any further or outstanding defects would then be remediated by the developer and the contractor. Upon completion of any such works to the satisfaction of council engineers, the works become the statutory duty of the council under Section 41(1) of the Highways Act 1980 to maintain thereafter. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Sumner. Section 41(1) of the Highways Act it gives unqualified duty on the council to maintain the highway, whereas Section 278 is a contractual agreement, as I understand it. So surely, therefore, the liability of the council still remains under Section 41(1) while the work is before the work is taken over by the council, and therefore any claim should be made for injury which has occurred to the council, and then the council would recover the costs contractually with the subcontractor. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I wasn't. That was a statement. I didn't pick a question up, I don't believe. Is there an actual question?
So my question is the liability, notwithstanding that there's a contractual agreement, is the liability under Section 41 for the duty to maintain the duty to maintain the highway results in an unqualified liability, which exists even before the Section 278 work is completed?
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid I can't answer that at the moment. I haven't got any information with me with regards to liability elements, but I'm happy to get a written update.
Yeah. Thank you, and I understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Pike. As Councillor says, he'll provide a written follow-up to that second supplementary. Can we move, therefore, to question E on our agenda? And I believe we have Mr. Morgan with us. And Mr. Morgan's question is to Councillor Ross McKinnon. So over to you, Councillor McKinnon.
Do I?
No, you don't need to say anything, Mr. Morgan. Councillor McKinnon is going to answer your question. It's up on the screen, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask a supplementary.
Got you. Thank you.
But I think there's too many people with their mic. Lovely, there's there. So thanks, Leader, and thanks for your question, Mr. Morgan. In answer to your questions, be a short answer to my previous one. Of course, that is a possible path for the council to take. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Lance, in December, you basically said that you would make a decision whether the council would move ahead with its own property development company by the end of this year. We're not far off that. So could you give us an indication whether that is a policy you're going to pursue, or how close are you to making that decision?
Thanks for that. I'm simply in a position to reiterate our previous commitment made at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Can we move then to question F on our agenda? And I believe Mr. Story is joining us virtually. And the question is to Councillor Howard Wollaston. Question F on our agenda this evening, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Mr. Story, for your question. West Berkshire Council is committed to accessible, transparent decision-making. Public questions are a key part of this, and we welcome the opportunity they offer to scrutinise matters which are important to our residents. At the beginning of the pandemic, we acted quickly to move our public meetings online so that our democratic process could continue. We were one of the first local authorities in the country to do so. Our public meetings of council and executive have been viewed online 6,725 times since then, which is a figure far in excess of what we could have hoped for in the past when meetings took place in person alone. We have also undertaken 157 public surveys and consultations at a corporate level to ensure that the views of the public shape our decision-making, and have answered 219 public questions in the past year, which represents a near threefold increase when compared to 74 questions received in the previous year. As well as tabling public questions and responding to our consultations, members of the public can ask their local councillor to consider calling in a decision on their behalf, which would lead to being discussed at the council's Overview and Scrutiny Management Commission, which may decide it should be reviewed. We have debated 13 topics at our OSMC in the past year across a wide range of areas. Last, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the leader of the council, Councillor Lynn Doherty, for going even further during the pandemic and hosting her own Ask Lynn Facebook live videos. So I know this has given a new audience the opportunity to ask questions and hear updates in a less formal setting. I know how helpful these sessions have been to so many people over the past year. These sessions allow people to ask questions and follow-ups live in the comments section and are completely virtual, so that people do not have to need to come to Newbury to join in the discussion. These videos have also received hundreds of views across Facebook and YouTube. These figures show that there are strong levels of public engagement with the work of the council, but there's always more room to do. We have recently appointed an officer to focus on opportunities to expand on this, and we'll be considering the formats of meetings as well as other steps we can take to increase participation in our democratic processes. This work has not yet started, but please rest assured that we have to build on the enhanced levels of engagement and participation we have seen during the pandemic. We'll be progressing it as a priority. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Do you not think the limitations and restrictions on how the questions are asked at meetings such as this has put residents off engaging in this way? Because this seems to, it feels that you only get questions from those residents and groups who've worked through the system and have figured it out. And I suspect that was behind some of the frustration of the leader when she commented on
it. I don't see what more we could do to encourage more questions from the general public. I do thank you for appreciating the difficulties we went through earlier this year when a very limited number of topics were focused upon by many questioners. But okay. I'm open to any suggestions that you may have, sir.
I may come back to you on that, but thank you.
Thank you both. Can we move on then to question H on our agenda this evening? And I believe Mr. Goatley is with us, and his question is to Councillor Ross McKinnon. So is Mr. Goatley able to join us?
Yes.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, Mr. Goatley. I'm afraid I have to plead a little bit of confusion about the meaning of your question, Mr. Goatley, about the treatments which are not specified, nor are the building specified. So I guess I'm going to ask you for a supplementary, and perhaps you can enlighten me a little bit further.
Oh, makes a change, you asking me for a supplementary.
have to remember that question was written before the fire. But so what's happened is you've got an investment portfolio which you've looked after and insured, etc. You've got all right part office space. You also had in 2018 an asset of community value which was valued at £1 million to replace. But unfortunately, one isn't insured. And so taxpayer has just effectively lost £1 million. Can you explain that to them?
I wouldn't attempt to explain
McKinnon,
that.
I actually think that's a little bit of introducing a new question for you. So I feel sorry, Mr. Goatley. I think that's actually introducing a new subject to the question. Point of order, Councillor Vickers. I will be guided by our monitoring officer. He was asking for clarification on an empty property, partially empty council
I can reword it.
Building. We were trying to understand what you were actually asking, which building you were asking about, Mr. Goatley, because it's not specific in the question.
Well, do you have more than one office space that you've invested in that's empty?
We have a commercial portfolio holder for portfolio, so I'm unaware of if we have more than one. Councillor McKinnon may be able to shed some light for you.
I think what I was going to say was that I didn't accept the characterisation that Mr. Goatley was introducing, so an attempt to explain it would have been futile. But thank you for your questions in any case, Mr. Goatley.
Well, you haven't explained why you treat properties different in the portfolio that you hold, because the football pitch is an investment property by virtue of the fact that you're holding it. You're the owners.
Leader, if I can intervene, and the question has been answered in the way it was framed, and supplementary question has been answered. I think we've got other questions waiting. Could you please stand aside? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goatley. Can we move on then to item J on our agendas, or is that I? Sorry, that might be my eyesight. I, which is Mrs. Coppinger, who I believe is with us and able to join us, and it's to Councillor Richard Sumner.
Mr. Coppinger, thank you for your question. Without restricting itself to controlling aggregate tipper trucks and with local residential amenity in mind, the council has regularly applied planning condition controls over the timing of activities which may, if they went uncontrolled, give rise to disturbance to local people. Those controls have related to hours of operations placed on business premises applications, hours of constructions of building, and hours of activity involving external operations. All of those will have limited the incidence of nighttime traffic in the area, as will controls that have been placed on lorry routing associated with planning approvals that have been given. Do you have a supplementary?
Okay, so just to clarify there, are you telling me that the traffic is limited? So that means, can you confirm that those planning restrictions, what they are specifically? Or are you?
I can't, I think you're just referring back to your question. So you're looking at a particular area. I haven't got the detail about that specific area. I think what we've got is something that we apply wherever we can, wherever we need to. If you've got specifics, that I'm happy to discuss specifics if you have anything that you want to share with me offline.
Well, so then my question, supplementary question to you then is, if there are restrictions on sites, why are those not being enforced?
So it's an enforcement issue that you're seeing.
Yes, and I have been in touch with Richard Beach, as have many of the constituents in the community.
Okay.
To ask, why are trucks keeping us awake at night relentlessly? So we've got at the moment vehicles which are travelling in the middle of the night, and actually on some occasions and very recently they are passing my house every 5 minutes, and those are 20-ton aggregate trucks. They shake when they're empty.
Yeah.
They're crossing over capsize. You can hear them when they're coming in a convoy, like a train coming down the tracks. There are lots of people in the community who are not able to sleep outside of the hours probably from midnight until 2:30 in the morning.
Okay. If you'll allow me, what I will do then is pick up with Richard Beach.
Yeah.
I will look at the information that you've provided, and I will get further detail on what we can and can't do. I think the issue really is that we cannot have enforcement officers there all of the time, which I'm sure you appreciate. And it would appear that you've got certainly unsociable hours being utilised. So if you're happy to leave that with me, I'm happy to pick that up with the officers and happy to come back to you on the back of those emails to see if we can continue that conversation and find out what else we can do for you.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I believe we also have question J on our agenda from Bridget Jones, who is attending virtually, and that's also to you, Councillor Sumner.
Is Ms Jones in the...
I am told she is.
Okay, thank you for your question, Mrs Jones. All reports to Western Area Planning Committee include a planning history section to remind members of the relevant decisions that have been made in the past. The committee itself is aware of previous considerations when it's considering individual applications and has advice from officers on the impacts. There's been no critical infrastructure master plan created for memory. Do you have a supplementary?
Hello, I do. I understand what you're saying about there is previous considerations applied. However, the cumulative impact now has become quite unacceptable for local residents. And that has caused, as I put in my question, air, light, noise pollution, localised flooding, power and connectivity issues. There's too much demand from the grid currently. So local residents are suffering repeated power cuts. I'm just wondering, when you might consider, or if you might consider, developing a master plan and looking at that, at the critical infrastructure for memory.
Okay, thank you. I can't answer that immediately. I'm happy again to take that up with officers. I think the creation of any master plan from a timeline point of view, if I'm being blunt, wouldn't probably fit in with the issues that you're currently experiencing. But again, let me take that up with officers and find out where we are on that trip and see if we can again come back to you with some further information on it.
Okay, thank you both. Can we therefore move on to question K on our agenda this evening? And that's Mr. Nigel Foote, and I believe Mr. Foote's here, to Councillor Dominic Berwick.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Foote. You raised some very important points, and I share your concern about the increase in mental health issues in schools. And I'm pleased that our children are returning to school today without the need for bubbling. This means an end to whole classes being sent home with the consequent interruption to their learning that entails. I know that government is committed to building back better for every young person, and I'm delighted. Sorry to amuse you, Councillor Pattenden. I'll repeat. The government is committed to building back better for every young person. And I'm delighted that mental health and well-being is at the heart of recovery plans. More than £17 million has been announced to improve mental health and well-being support in schools and colleges. This includes a new £7 million Wellbeing for Education Recovery Programme, which provides free expert training, support and resources for staff dealing with children and young people experiencing additional pressures which have led to trauma, anxiety and grief. And we've heard in the news today that the government's talking about a further £1 billion to be spent on young people's recovery. Don't know the details of that yet, but I'm sure that we're going to benefit. Here in West Berkshire earlier this year, the Berkshire West Integrated Care Partnership reviewed the emotional well-being and mental health services provided to children and young people. Since then, we have seen the same increase
in demand as in other parts of the country for such services in our schools. New government funding means that the CCG will be introducing a second mental health support team to supplement the work of the one we already have in West Berkshire, and we know what great work they do. In another example of health and councils working together, in 2020 we commissioned an online mental wellbeing support service named Couth, which I have spoken about before in this chamber. This has proved useful for young people to access at times in the day that are outside of normal working hours. Council's long-established Emotional Health Academy works closely with schools to support young people. We recently created a group within our education team to help pupils anxious about attending school. Council also supports an innovative project with Berkshire Youth to have youth workers based in secondary schools providing one-to-one support, which includes mental health and emotional well-being. These are some examples of how we're helping to improve the well-being of our children and young people. Effects of the pandemic continue to emerge, and the oversight of the West Berkshire Health and Wellbeing Board, chaired by Councillor Bridgman, who's here with us today, will allow us to respond to changing demands and challenges. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Foote?
Yes, I do. Could you give me an indication of what extra funding you're putting in to our schools in West Berkshire to facilitate the extra workload and the extra need that we all know and that you've just elaborated on? How much money is going in, please?
Well, I mentioned earlier on about the money that's been spent by government. We have, and I mentioned in my question, my answer to you earlier on about the £400,000. There are a whole array of funding streams that we use to support our schools, and I'll happily give you a written response on that.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both. Therefore, can we move on to question M on our agenda this evening, which is Mr. Simon Pike, who I believe is virtual, and that's to Richard Sumner, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you again, Councillor Pike, for your question. Bloor homes were conditioned to install the crossings on Hennick Lane, among other highway improvement works under the S278 agreement. All works have been severely impacted by COVID-19 and subsequent manpower issues, and the developer was directed by West Berkshire Highways to ensure that all unfinished works were left in a safe condition for pedestrian use in the meantime, a duty and responsibility incumbent on any developer and specified as such within the terms of the legal agreement. The works programme was delayed multiple times, and West Berkshire Highways Development Control has been in regular contact with the developer to try and ensure the works are completed as soon as possible. Those works are now programmed to start on 1st of September, so yesterday, and should be complete by the 7th. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you for that report on progress. They haven't started as of an hour ago, but I will look forward to the progress, to their completion, and it's a pity that someone got injured in the meantime, tripping over. Thank you.
Okay, I will get them chased up again for you. Thank you for making me aware.
Thank you both. We've just got time for one more question. So we'll take question N on our agenda, which is Mrs. Coppinger again, who is with us this evening. So Mrs. Coppinger, if you'd like to come back into the chamber, I believe your question is to Councillor Richard Sumner again.
Thank you again, Mrs. Coppinger, for your question. Yes, our qualified planning officers have the necessary experience to deal with to deal appropriately with the technicalities and practicalities of screening opinion decisions. Where input is needed from subject-specific council officers, that is equally available through consultation. Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, I do. Yes, please. So the reason why I was asking that question is because no environmental impact assessments have been done either on the London Road Industrial Estate or on Membury Airfield Industrial Estate, when clearly they are required, as they're both cumulative impact developments. please can you supply a full and comprehensive list of all planning officers' qualifications demonstrating that they are qualified to take the required decisions on environmental screening?
Thank you for that question. I would need to look to our legal guidance on that one as to whether this is information that can be shared, but I'm happy to do that.
It would be nice to be able to trust that those people have those qualifications.
Mr. Sheikh, are you able to give some guidance, please? Okay, so thank you. We will come back to you on it, Mrs. Coppinger. So thank you, everybody, for submitting your questions this evening. We have had 30 minutes of public questions now, so any that we haven't been able to get around to will receive a written response to those questions. Can we move on, members, then to item 5 on our agenda, which is petitions. Can I ask members if they're aware of any petitions being submitted for this evening? I'm looking round, I see no hands, therefore we can move on to item 6. Now, item 6 on your agenda this evening is the separate food waste collection report, and I believe Councillor Steve Ardwater, you wish to introduce that report?
Yes, thank you, Leader.
And does that find a seconder?
Happy to second, Leader.
Over to you, Councillor Ardwater.
Thank you, Leader. As members will be aware, we made provision in this budget for capital funding of 900,000 to enable a separate food waste collection service to be run from next year. And the outline concept, again, as a refresher, is simply that an additional weekly food waste collection will be offered to all residents, and this will be attractive both on the environmental grounds that far less transport of waste outside the district and the emissions from there will be generated. That financially the council will save money because we will no longer be paying for disposal of food waste in these facilities. And in terms of residents, rather than the 25% of black bins which are currently occupied by food waste, residents will be able to dispose of food waste on a weekly basis, in other words, at a much higher frequency than is now the case. So this is a generally attractive proposition from all three fronts. It has to date has attracted cross-party support, for which I'm very grateful. We do wish to progress now that negotiations with Veolia are drawing to a close with commitment of funding, in other words, to authorise Veolia to purchase these vehicles. And again, as the summary says, the request is for us to approve and to allow this to go ahead. I would draw members' attention to the risk which has already arisen because so many other councils are also developing separate food waste collections at its time, that the lead time for the specialised vehicles needed is lengthening. And so while we wish to launch this service shortly after the end of the first quarter of next year, there is a risk that that date will slip. I very much hope not, but by approving this paper tonight, we will be able to keep pressure on the supply chain to enable that. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Members of the executive, is there any questions for Councillor Ardwater? I just had one, Councillor Ardwater. I have a long memory and I seem to remember having a caddy in my kitchen. Can you tell me why you think this might be different this time round?
Yes, Leader, and again, my memory is nearly as long as yours. I also recall it from a long time ago. I think the difference is we are enabling an entirely new service. In other words, as well as those food caddies being emptied, instead of those food waste caddies being emptied by green waste collection vehicles, it would be run by a specific service independent of those. So the firstly, the communications and publicity and encouragement we're planning to introduce to encourage residents to use this will be much more forthcoming. But operationally, again, it would be weekly, which it wasn't previously, and decoupled from green waste and other services.
Thank you, Councillor Ardwater. I welcome that then. So, Councillor Sumner, do you wish to come in now, or do you want to reserve your rights?
I'll reserve my right. Thank you.
In which case, I'm going to go over to Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Ardwater. I think this is a really welcome initiative. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have any food waste, but we are where we are, so we have to find a way of dealing with it. I'd be grateful if you could pass on my thanks to Kofi and his colleagues. I found them to be absolutely brilliant during my time on the council in answering local queries, and I think that his work on this is really, really important. I've just got 2 or 3 questions, if that's okay. It talks about planned consultation with the public, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that, bearing in mind we're a long way down the road of going ahead with this. What would that consultation involve, and is it actually more of a sort of education exercise? Also interested, what will happen in flats? I think it's good that flats will have the opportunity to take part, but I think there's a danger that you could end up with 30 caddies dumped in a heap outside the flats and maybe only 1 or 2 being used. So can we make sure that we avoid a situation where there's lots of unwanted plastic lying around? And also I'd be interested to know what we're going to do with the organic soil improver that's produced as a result of this initiative. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your questions, Councillor Culver, and yes, I will pass your compliments on to Kofi and the team, and I think generally is very appreciated. So in terms of your actual questions, the public consultation has happened in several parts, and in particular, most recently, as part of the environmental strategy delivery plan, of which this is one of the elements. This measure did achieve a high level of enthusiasm and public support in that consultation. But you're quite right, the key consultation and area of engagement will be when we are just about to launch and having launched. In other words, we will be communicating through as many channels as we can, as widely as we can, to encourage uptake. So those plans are being developed further. Obviously, there's a lot more to do, but ideally from May, and certainly in the following months after that of next year, we will be definitely articulating the value to everyone of doing that. Regarding flats, you're absolutely right. We do need to cater for residents who live in flats. And this, frankly, has been one of the weaknesses with the current garden waste collection, in that it has been very difficult to offer garden waste, albeit, of course, people who live in flats tend to have gardens, whereas they all will be generating food waste. So I cannot give you the detail of that, but absolutely the need to make an attractive offer for flats residents has been recognised and is part of the solution. And regarding the soil improver, as now, the food waste will be again. I forget the phrase, but it will be composted at our Padworth facility. It is already being sold and used to local farmers and horticultural businesses, and there is ample capacity to increase that. So we look forward to more volumes of improved soil or soil improver being used locally within horticultural and agricultural businesses. Thank you.
Leader, may I ask a very short supplementary? Will it be possible for residents to have access to that soil improver as well?
I can't answer that right now, Councillor Culver. Again, it seems a very attractive idea. Let me consult with the team, and we'll see what could be done. Because yes, that might be a nice thing to offer, albeit from Padworth, I think, as and when we launch it.
Thank you both. I've got Councillor Vickers next.
Thank you, Leader. I've got a couple of questions, but if I just explain where I'm coming from a bit. I know we're only supposed to ask questions as mere opposition shadow exec, but I think it would be helpful, Leader. I have retained the food, the green bin, because I've got a reasonable garden and it's worth my while, £50 a year. That doesn't mean to say I think we should charge that, but that's where I'm coming from. I buy as little food as I can, and I try to reduce what I buy and reduce what goes into the waste stream. And everything that isn't meat goes in my, what I call my Dalek in the garden. Now, there's quite a lot of people like me. I'm not saying it's the majority. So my two questions are, 2 or 3 years ago, we were told that the government was considering making councils responsible for free collection of garden waste. So question number one is that completely not going to happen, and this is the government solution to the problem of food waste? And secondly, are we looking at can we please look at, and if we can't, then why not, the bigger picture of trying to reduce food waste before it even gets into the waste stream? And all of this needs a lot of education. And that ties in with what Councillor Culver said, is that there's a problem with flats, because let's face it, a lot of people who live in flats, there's social housing, the message they're trying to get through on all of this recycling and climate change initiative is difficult. So I suppose the third question is, can we please improve the communications with the public about all that we're trying to do in this area? Because otherwise I fear that the 10% take up, which is reported in the meeting, which is regarded as disappointing with the current arrangements, is just not going to improve much. So there's 3 questions there, really. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Over to you, Councillor Ardwater.
Yes, and thank you for your questions, Councillor Vickers. So regarding the first point, yes, absolutely. The government has been pressing local authorities for free garden waste collection. This area is still very unclear. And there has been at a regional and national level a bit of a financial pushback because, of course, government have been asking councils to provide what is currently in most cases a charge service for free, and the discussion of where does the money come from is absolutely on the agenda. So there is still a very good enthusiasm from the government to standardise garden waste collection. I do very much hope that money will be forthcoming, allowing us and every council to do that on a no-cost basis. Until they do, we really need to continue as we are. Regarding your second and third question, to be honest, I can't quite follow the distinction between the last two. But on the second, at least, of your 3, the need to educate and communicate, absolutely, we will definitely play our part in doing this. One of the improvements I hope we will see at a national level is that there'll be much greater coordination between not only ourselves and what our messaging and our communications, but on a national scale of not only central government education and messaging, but industry and other bodies. So absolutely, it's a huge need, and we can but do our part. If you had a third question which is not answered by that, please restate it.
Yes, well, if I could, Leader, just to clarify, the second question was, when we talk about success, and we're saying here in the report that there's only a 10% take up, some of that remaining 90% may be people who are simply not needing to put significant amounts of food into the food waste stream because they have achieved or are seeking to achieve the ideal, which is not to create waste at all. So I think we need to be careful about how we measure success on this, because the real success would be to cut down the amount of waste that we're generating, not just cut down on the proportion of the waste that is going into the recycling stream. So that's what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. As portfolio holder for communications, I'm very much aware of what the communications team are doing. There's quite a few campaigns going on, and I know we'll be supporting Global Recycling Day. I know we'll continue to be pushing that message, because I think that education piece is key. And I think our comms team here are very much aware of that. And there's quite a few green campaigns going on at the moment to encourage people to do that, particularly in the lead up to COP26 as well. So thank you for those thoughts. I don't know if you want to add any more on the comments.
No, thank you, Leader.
Councillor?
Sorry, I was going to go across to Councillor.
Thank you very much, Leader. And yeah,
separate separate food waste collection. I think we're all, going down that path one way and the other, and we're legally forced to by the looks of it. There is something that occurs to me in terms of what's in the report, and there's a few things I'd like to point out. I don't know if you want me to point out issues in the report here, which are just typos and stuff like that, or whether you want.
Let's not do the typos.
Okay,
Happy if you want to drop Councillor Arderwater a line, but let's.
Yeah,
not
I'll
take
drop him a
time doing
line. But
typos.
there's a few in there, but anyway, the issue comes, I suppose, in this delivery time frame, and it's 10 to 12 months that it mentions in the report, and that's the first risk. And you mentioned that, but of course, there's another risk at the moment, and anybody who's watching the news will have heard about the 100,000 shortage of drivers, and this requires us to find 6 more drivers, some operatives, and so on. And it takes a year to train up a driver approximately. So we have an even bigger risk in terms of getting the staff. Now that was even further supplemented by Veolia being on the TV this morning, saying that they've already got issues with availability of drivers in certain locations. I'd not heard that we have that issue, but maybe you could expand on that for us. So I think the chances of meeting next May is unfortunately nearly zero. And there are some supplementary bits about the financial impact that might have in terms of the savings and so on that you may wish to comment on if we don't make it this. Well, we won't make it this current fiscal year, but maybe next. The second bit of what I saw was I put
Point
it
of
out
order,
there.
Chairman.
So again,
Point of order. Councillor Abbs, is there a question somewhere in there?
Well, yes, for Councillor Arderwater to confirm about the statements I'm making, there are additional risks that I'm pointing out. Does he agree with those risks or not? It's not just a drain and rambling, if that were you're referring. I'm trying to get the risks across. Has he considered a risk? Has the council considered this? What are the financial implications of those additional risks? And I was going to go on now to talk about the IVC, but shall I pause there for you, Councillor Arderwater?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Abbs, and certainly the lorry driver risk has already been noted, of course. So yeah, thank you for confirming that, and yes, we will continue on the case.
Okay. So the other thing was the in-vessel composting. If you could quickly confirm my understanding of what material currently goes in there at the moment.
Yes, that is currently all garden waste and food waste goes in there.
Okay, so we had a scenario not that long ago where we had green bins on everybody's doorsteps and they were being collected. And today we still have the situation where we can put our food waste in that green bin. And the report says that, in fact, the new food waste is going to go to exactly the same place as the green waste, the IVC facility. So rather than waiting for trucks to be purchased, which will be a year away, why are we not removing the green bin charge, implementing a food collection strategy along with more green waste, filling our capacity and getting going with actually carbon reduction?
Very briefly, Councillor Abbs, and this subject has been exhaustively talked through. We need to make a charge for green waste because of the financial cost to the council of not doing so. As I mentioned in my response to Councillor Vickers, we would love to offer this for free, but the question back to you might be, which other service would you like to sacrifice?
Well,
if
you're
rather give free
several
garden waste to people?
You're running several underspends at the moment.
Okay,
So
thank you. We're not going to go into debate on the whole budget. Over to you, Councillor Macro.
Sorry, had a difficulty unmuting there. Thank you, Leader. Yes, I've got a few questions and points on this. First of all, it says that the IVC facility at Padworth has suitable spare capacity. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I got confirmation that there were times when the amount of soil conditioner or compost being produced there was greater than the demand, and was actually being given away to farmers. So I'd like confirmation that that's not likely to occur again. Going on to the issue of the lack of use of the green bins for food waste, why, when the green bin charge out of the garden waste subscription was introduced, didn't this council encourage people to hang on to their green bins and use it for food waste? As I can remember the then executive member saying, oh, well, you can put your garden waste in your black bin. Well, that encourage people to return their green bins rather than use them for this. On a separate kind of issue, I noticed that the vehicles and the caddies are going to be funded by this council, but they're going to be procured by Veolia. And I'm wondering where the ownership is going to reside, particularly for the vehicles. Will the council own the vehicles or will Veolia? Because I'm worried if in the unlikely event of something happening to Veolia that it can't continue with the contract, I wouldn't want to see those vehicles disappear if the council's paid for them. Thank you.
So thank you for your questions, Councillor Macro. I can't honestly comment on what may or may not have happened in the past with capacity, but right now the situation is that indeed there is spare capacity at Padworth for composted material. Hence, this is definitely not an issue or will not be an issue when the food waste services launch. Regarding funding and ownership, under the PPI contract, which your colleague Councillor Jeffrey set up in 2005, there is these vehicles are legally owned by Veolia. Veolia is a large, reputable, long-standing company. Indeed, if Veolia were to vanish, we'd have far bigger problems than these new trucks. So it seems a remote issue, to be honest, and again is very amply covered in the discussions and agreements which have been going on between ourselves and Veolia.
And the issue of why we didn't encourage people to continue to use green bins for food waste?
Well, again, as you know, we certainly have encouraged, and many of us previously have used and continue to use green bins for food waste, even when there is no garden waste. But I cannot exhaustively go through what may or may not have been said sometime in the past. I can only comment on recent history and plans going forward.
Thank you both. I see no other hands. Councillor Sumner, you've not had the opportunity to come in yet. Can I come over to you?
Indeed, Leader, thank you. Just picking up on Councillor Macro's last point, but my recollection actually was that the conversation was that green bins could be used for food waste, even if residents decided not to subscribe to the invoicing for the bin. I don't think it was an instruction to put food waste into the black bin. It was simply subscribe, use food waste in the green wheelie bin. If you absolutely don't want either, then the black bin, of course, will still allow for food to be taken away. Having said that, I'm quite encouraged by the positive messages that have come through on this. I've actually seen these bins in action in Reading Borough, working in Reading as I do, and I think generally the feeling there has been positive. I think there have been comments around hot weather, food waste hanging around for too long. For me, this combats that. This gets rid of the whole maggot and fly issue, which is often brought up, and I welcome a solution to do that. I welcome the positive message of, and I think probably a reminder as part of the education piece that Councillor Culver and Councillor Vickers picked up on, that yes, if you're doing that and you're emptying that bin every week, actually that might be the reminder that people need, that they're spending too much time taking their bin out every week, and they could actually reduce the amount of food waste that they're generating. I hope that we can tap into communications that are ongoing, and I hope we can utilise the resource that Veolia have had historically to help to educate. And we've got options on how we can do that. So I think this is a good move, absolutely supportive of it, happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Members of the Executive, we have a recommendation laid out in 2.1 of the paper. It is recommended that the Executive consider the proposal in this paper and grants approval for the introduction of separate food waste collection in the district. Can I ask you all, by using your microphone, if you are in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendation? So if you can all just press on your microphone your vote. And we can all see that everybody has approved it. There is a problem with the screen sharing, so apologies if you cannot see that at home, but we could also see here on our screens here that that has been approved. So thank you everybody for your contribution to that debate this evening.
Leader, I'll tell you that I've got YouTube up and it did show.
Even better. Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. I knew I could rely on you. Therefore, can I move on to item 7 on our agenda this evening, which is the Revenue Financial Performance Report for Q1 of 21-22. And Councillor Ross McKinnon, I believe you're going to introduce this report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leader. And yes, this report is simply to note, so I don't think we need a proposer and a seconder in this instance. There is a projected underspend at the year end of £0.3 million. Now, as is usual, that's comprised of a combination of forecast under and overspends across the directorates. In the People Directorate, there is a forecast overspend of £59,000. That's after the use of government COVID funding and service-specific risk reserves, which were allocated to the Adult Social Care and Children and Family Services budget back in March, recognising the increased volatility inherent in the ASC modelling in particular as a result of the pandemic. In place, additional staffing costs are forecast, reflecting pressures relating to the local plan and ecological assessments, contributing towards a forecast overspend of £0.2 million. Resources has a forecast overspend of £0.4 million, arising from really less income than expected from traded services, specifically schools insurance services, and also additional temporary staff costs in the finance service. Capital financing, however, is forecast to be underspent by £1 million from more efficient treasury management and more judicious use of lower interest rates on short-term borrowing. In summary then, the revenue budget is forecast to be underspent by just 0.2%, reflecting the continued strong and robust financial management of the Council, with risk reserve mechanisms operating as they should to smooth volatility, particularly relating to adult social care. Thanks, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. I just wanted to say, it's looking at the report, it's such difficult circumstances that we're still in, and with the impact of COVID and what that has done on our services and our funding going forward and the uncertainty of financial funding going forward, I just think that the finance team here have done an excellent job. So I was going to thank them for that, because I appreciate we're in very uncertain times still, and will probably still be that throughout this financial year. The one thing I was disappointed to read within the report was the fact that within Children and Family Services, their overspend is down to the fact that our partners have chosen not to contribute into the family safeguarding model. And I think that's rather short-sighted and disappointing, given that we know that the impact that is having on our children and young people here. So I just want to say, you know, it's disappointing from that respect. But they were the points I wanted to make on the report. I don't know if any of the members of the executive had any other areas they wanted to pick up on. I'm conscious as well, we've got Councillor Stewart at home. So I'm just looking. No, in which case I will go to Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think obviously this is a Q1 report, so we are still at the beginning of that financial journey throughout the year. I think what my concern is, Councillor McKinnon, is being close to that figure, having already allocated out your risk reserves. And so I just wondered if you could just give a view on, do you think that, and obviously I know that you're forecasting as best as you can at this point, so I'm really not holding you to it, but you know, are those risk reserves up to the job this year if they've already been allocated out in Q1? You know, so would we see potentially a call from our general reserves back into top up risk reserves, you know, maybe at the Q2 position? Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dillon. And that's not an entirely unexpected question. It's not an unfair one, really. But of course, my answer, you know what it's going to be. Of course, that's our position, because that's what's in the report at this point. And yes, it is. I am fond of saying at this point that any forecast or any model will not be bang on at the end of the year. And I know that you and Councillor Brooks are perfectly sensible in recognising that as well. When you bring up the reserves usage, I would point out, though, that, and this isn't really a contradiction to your point, it's more of a corollary to it, that COVID has increased hugely the volatility into that model. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, no one's made a mistake. That's just a fact. So in the budget, we recognise that. You know, we say, look, here's our central forecast. It could in the end be well above or well below it. You know, that's the definition of volatility, I suppose. In the event it is well above, well, look, here's how we deal with that. And in a sense, that's what's supposed to happen, that use of reserves. So apologies for the long-winded answer, but the short answer is yes, and it's good to see that mechanism happening the way it is. But of course, we'll resume this at Q2 and Q3 ongoing. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you both. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Just one question. In paragraph 4.3, there's an accompanying graph, and it mentions that there's spending of £500,000 in the Chief Executive's office. I just wondered what that money's actually spent on. If you could give me some more detail of the activities, thank you.
Yeah, so obviously, as you might expect, the Chief Executive's office is very much an administrative and back office function. I don't have that detail now, Councillor Culver, but if you'll permit me, then I'll try and get that detail for you as soon as I can.
Thank you both. Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just picking up on a point that you did mention, Councillor McKinnon. Firstly, the overall loss of £100,000 caused by what looks like the Department of Education undermining the council and offering an alternate source of insurance. I mean, that's not a power grab, is it, by any chance?
That's not how I would describe it. I think that's a bit of a stretch, Councillor Pattenden, but I'll thank you for pointing it out.
Another question as well, if I can. Leader, you mentioned the fact that the partner agency is not currently contributing to the family safeguarding model. Now, that's obviously something that is, I know, highly regarded and by the beneficiaries, by the vulnerable families that benefit from it. So it's obviously very unfortunate that the partner agencies are not also contributing. Is there a risk to that service being cut if the partner agency or agencies don't contribute in future?
Councillor, are you okay with me?
Yes, thank you, Lily. Thank you for that question, Councillor, and it's a good one. It's disappointing, extremely disappointing, that the CCG and Thames Valley Police haven't seen fit to replicate the commitments to funding this model that they have made in the early years. And I can assure you that that members and officers have tried to encourage them. You're also right that they see that it's they value the service, but I guess, you know, it's they're benefiting from their own budgets are benefiting from the success of the family safeguarding model, and sadly they don't see fit to return the favour. And to your point about any risk to the service, I would say there's no risk to the service. We're looking at every way we can to continue, because it has become part of the culture now here in West Berkshire. Of course, I would happily have a discussion with our partners on the risk aspects of that, because if there were any concerns, they could minimise the risk by contributing.
Thank you both. I've got Councillor Abbs next.
Thank you very much, Leader. Only one thing, really. In the report, it mentions something called the Natural Carbon Reduction Methods Project. So I searched through the strategy for that term, couldn't find it. I searched for the delivery plan, couldn't find it. What is it, please?
Councillor Alderwater, are you able to take that?
Okay.
Very sorry, Leader, and Councillor Abbs, I can't advise right now, but I'm sure we can look into it.
I would like to know what it was, because it's obviously 1 million, and that's quite a lot.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. I noticed on page 25 that long-term services for adult social care are 2.1 million overspent. I take that as meant it's 2.1 million overspent within the quarter rather than over the year. And this is down to higher client numbers than modelled. And this is partly because, fortunately, there's been 51% fewer deaths from the same period last year, which is good news. But I was wondering, in that modelling, I can remember the conversations going on when the modelling results first came out as to whether whether the number of clients they predicted could be reduced because of COVID-19 and because of the number of deaths. So I'd like to know really whether this is the original model number or whether those modelled numbers had actually been changed. Thank you.
I'm going to let Councillor Stewart come in on there.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Macro. The model is one of those conversations that that appears every quarter when we talk about the financial situation, and I've had quite a few conversations now with officers, and that's not just adult social care, that's finance officers who actually help to build the model along with the information and expertise that the adult social care teams and the commissioning teams build into this. You're absolutely right to point out that the good news in that we had less deaths, so we got 51% less deaths than in the same period last year. The model is built on the data that we know. So the data, the things that have actually happened, the actuals, that data goes into the model, and the model is then therefore expected to predict what is going to happen from that data. When the situation changes quite substantially, it means that the model can appear to be incorrect. Well, the model has only done what it can do with the information that went in at that time. So at the moment, we have the model numbers, and then we also have a forecast line as well. If you look on the graph that the model is including, I would suggest that forecast line is the one that we need to work with, because that's based on the actual numbers that we have. And I have continued to ask our finance officers and the adult social care teams that are involved in this to work out how we can test the model that we have. If we're constantly getting numbers that we are not able to understand or don't appear to match what is happening in real life, shall we say, then it still says to me that there is some work to be done. So I'm continuing to do that. I'm also just as I've got the talking stick, we're also looking at the strategy that we have for our care homes. It mentions in the report the fact that we have had some clients with complex needs that our own care homes might not be able to deal with, and therefore we have to go to the external market. So we need to think about our strategy for our care homes and how we commission in the external market too. So that doesn't mean that we're going to get rid of our care homes. It could mean that we decide that we want to expand our care homes, or that we want to change the services that we have. So at the moment, there is an internal conversation to look at what the possibilities might be, and I would expect there to be a consultation to come out to the wider public in due course. I can't say timelines; that would be unfair to put pressure on anybody, but we do need to look at that. And of course, we also have adults. We also have the long COVID. So what are the outcomes that will hit adult social care in future because of the aspects of COVID that may linger and may be quite substantial. So that also needs to be taken into consideration about how we plan for the future as well. It was a very long answer. Hopefully I felt.
Well, thank you very much for that information. I don't think you actually answered my question. I mean, in the report it says that the number of clients is 1,734, whereas the model predicted 1,689. And I do remember going back to the spring, hearing that the numbers that the model were predicted were thought to be an overestimate. We're now saying it's an underestimate. So what I'm saying is, was that 1,689 the original number that was modelled back in the spring, or had that been subsequently adjusted because people didn't believe the numbers it was producing?
As far as I'm aware, it was the original.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor McKinnon, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, leader, and thanks to Councillor Stewart. Those very helpful, interesting comments, really from an operational perspective about the model. From a budgetary perspective with the model, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on. All but the most unfair observer would recognise that the volatility relating to COVID has increased massively. Last year we saw volatility on the downside. But of course, it's then the devil's own job to think, well, how much of a bounce back is there going to be in terms of client numbers? It's a logical fallacy to say, and I don't think you were specifically saying this, but I think you were getting to it, to say, well, look, your model wasn't bang on, so someone's made a mistake or you're doing it wrong. That's not how models work. The fact that back in the budget, we recognised the increased volatility and put in place prudent measures to deal with it. You mentioned the 2.1 figure. 2.3 of central government funding was there to deal with it. That's to the council's credit, not to its detriment. So the volatility exists, it's not going to go away. But I'd be wary of saying that it's wrong. Models by their nature are updated regularly and will never be 100% correct. And I think it's fair to point that out.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. I'm going to move us on. Councillor Dillon, you've got your hand up. Is it a quick one?
Yeah, it was just a suggestion, leader. In terms of just that modelling review that Councillor Stewart was referring to doing in future, I just wonder is in terms of benchmarking against other councils, in terms of how close was their model versus how close was our model, see if there's any others that we can to look at, and whether the LGA had any support on it as well. That was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. I'm sure that Councillor Stewart can take that away offline and look into that. I'm not keen to have a long conversation about the model. I'm keen to move it on. Is it another point, Councillor Bridgman? Okay.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to make one clarification because Councillor Macro referred to the numbers we were looking as being end of period one numbers. My understanding, and I'm looking to Councillor McKinnon to confirm or deny, that what they are is a prediction to the end of the year based on quarter one experience.
Absolutely confirmed. Yeah, whenever we see these figures in here, and it does take a bit of getting your head around at first, they're projected year-end figures based on what's happened in quarter one, but a prediction for the end of the year.
Thank you, everybody. Members of the executive, we have a report before us. It is to note only, so there is no vote on it. So I think you've had that opportunity to do so. Therefore, can we move on to item 8 on our agenda this evening, which is the Capital Financial Performance Report. And Councillor McKinnon, I understand this is back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I am proposing the support because there is a recommendation to reprofile just for 4 million of expenditure into the next financial year.
And I'm happy to second that from the chair.
Thank you very much indeed. We on the executive are rightly proud of our capital programme, investing in the future of our district with new schools, improved roads, active transport infrastructure, outstanding new sports facilities, environmental projects and more. Now, our projected capital investment for the year is £56.5 million. That's a forecast underspend of 3.7 million. But of course, as I've said many times before in these proceedings, that underspend doesn't mean the projects have been lost, merely delayed. The reasons for the delays, in fact, are very project specific. So the report details the fact our new I College was delayed due to unexpectedly protracted lease negotiations with the landowner. The A4 and Robin Hood roundabouts improvements are delayed due to required redesigns of the project, but is expected to be delivered next year. All in all, our vital capital programme remains on track to deliver outstanding new amenities and environmental improvements for all of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Members of the executive, do you have any questions with regards to our capital programme for Councillor McKinnon? No, in which case I'll take Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to know a bit more about this redesign of the Robin Hood roundabout and the delays on the A4, because obviously a very large proportion of our constituents use those facilities, and I wouldn't like to think that the redesign is going to end up costing more, or that the delays are as a result of anything within our control. I always suspect a certain large Thames Valley-wide public utility for delays in projects, but maybe I'm not being fair.
I'm going to go across to Councillor Sumner as the best person to answer that for you, Councillor Vickers.
When you started to go on about fairly large, you were heading my way anyway. So the redesign that we're looking at the moment is to take further opportunity for active travel funding and to build that into the previous draft design that was in place. It's as simple as that. So we're looking for actually to get more funding coming in and make the outcome bigger and better than it was originally going to be.
That sounds like good news. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, question about the delay with the iCollege project. So, why was there a delay in coming to the legal arrangements there?
We found it very difficult to reach agreement with the over the tenancy of the site that we are now going to be developing.
Thank you
Talked
both.
about it offline.
Actually, Councillor Pattenden, it was going to be the one thing I was going to congratulate. It was lovely to see in this report because having been involved with that project for some time, I know the difficulties that it's faced. So it's really great to see that project's progressing.
I'd echo that as well, Councillor Leader. Officers have worked extremely hard to untie this Gordian knot, which they successfully did.
Thank you all for your contributions. I have nothing further to add. I think Councillor McKinnon's said everything that needs to be said, so I don't intend to repeat. So please, can I ask members of the executive to vote by using their microphone in favour of the proposal? The proposal is laid out in A, which is to approve the proposed reprofiling of the 4.3 million of future expenditure for 21-22 into the following financial year 22-23. If I can ask you all to cast your votes. Thank you. Everybody has voted in favour of that. Can we move therefore to item number 9 on our agenda this evening, which is the key accountable performance measures for 21-22, which is the first quarter. Councillor Howard Wollaston, I believe this is over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Again, this is a report to note, so there won't be a proposer and seconder. And I'll be relatively brief. The statistics in this report show the outstanding performance of this council, and I'd particularly like to congratulate the officers on their efforts in difficult times. I would mention, however, that some of the previous quarters indicators were seriously impacted by COVID. Examples including the collection of council tax and business rates, as well as Ofsted inspections. These are back to normal levels in this Q1 report, which is welcome. I would just flag 2 areas which are under my particular portfolio, which is appraisals and training, and I've already put measures in place to get those back to the levels where they should be. I commend this report.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. I just wanted to say before we go on, laid out at 5.8 and 5.9 and 5.10 and 5.11 of the report, there's several awards there that have been made to West Berkshire Council, and I think it's worthwhile noting those awards, particularly as they've been achieved over the last 18 months, where it's been very difficult to do any business as usual, considering we've been responding to a global pandemic. So I just thought it was worthwhile highlighting the Community Municipal Fund investment fund there and the awards that have come through from our public finance awards, and also as far as the Thames Valley Berkshire Smart Cities project is concerned as well. I just wanted to congratulate all of those involved in those awards during what have been very difficult times. And I was also just wanted to mention it's reassuring to see some of the economic the economic indicators coming back as they are coming back, considering the concerns that we've got with regards to recovery and making sure that the local economy is able to come back after the impact of COVID. So again, just to say how reassuring it is for West Berkshire to see some of those economic indicators. Councillor Williston. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to, a point of note really, on page 79, one of the dashboards, well, 4 of them on that page, you've got a provisional number over Q1. Just to explain really for context, this is because the majority of our adult social care figures have to be given final sign-off by the Department of Health and Social Care, to make sure that we align internally with what we report statutorily as well. So it's just to say that that's why that says provisional on there. It's nothing to do with officers not having completed what they needed to do. We have to wait until it's been approved by the DHSC. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Stewart. Members of the Executive, do you have any other points you wish to raise? I'm looking around. No, in which case we'll go across to Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. To be honest with you, I can, having read the exception reports, I can understand why targets are where they are on those particular ones. The one I just wanted to talk about, the average number of days to make a full decision on new housing benefit claims it's only a day out, but as part of its rationale, it says the team is also 1 member of staff down, the vacancy for which is currently being advertised. And then under remedial, it says self-isolation grants are due to end in September, and we are currently recruiting for an additional staff member. So are we recruiting for 2 staff members or 1 staff member? And also in terms of the rationale for not hitting that target, it was about, you know, COVID and that extra pressure on that team. But actually the way that the government responded with support, which was always for local authorities to help distribute out grants, whether it be to a business or to individuals. I wonder if we could have foreseen the need for additional resource in there earlier and put it in. So my question is, can we get some clarity on the staffing? And then secondly is just, does the relevant portfolio holder have a view in terms of planning put in place that exasperated this situation, I suppose? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dillon. I'm going to go across to Councillor McKinnon for that.
Yep, thanks, Leader. And Councillor Dillon, I believe that is the 2 extra staff members. If that's not correct, then I'll get back to you further. But the way I read it is exactly as you did. I'm grateful that you've raised this point, actually, because our revenues and benefits staff team throughout the pandemic, and I know we're Q1 21-22 right now, but it is worth saying that they've proved to be an invaluable resource in being redeployed across the council in various guises to form a sort of rapid response team across the different services. And you're quite right to point out the fact that government have provided us with a lot of financial support. Unfortunately, they don't provide us with extra staff members to administer it. And it's like a double-edged sword. Of course, we want the funding and we want the support, but then that adds to the huge pressures on our revenues and benefits guys to administer it. And yeah, I mean, to be fair to the service directors over there, they absolutely did recognise that. But as the report mentions, and you've in fairness point out, staffing and recruitment has been a challenge. So I would push back slightly saying that we didn't anticipate it. It's more of an ability to bring in staff members of the appropriate skills and expertise. But other than that, I think we're agreeing quite happily.
Thank you both. Over to you, Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. On page 66 on the section 529, it says that the Regulation 19 consultation to inform the submission of the new local plan for examination in November is on track and in line with the local development scheme. Has that been updated since the local plan was put on pause, as we were told a few weeks ago?
I'm looking at Councillor Sumner, but I would think that these papers were published before we put the pause on, if I'm honest, Councillor Macro. So with the cycle and the way the papers came forward, you should see that change for Q2.
It's not
Am I right, Councillor Sumner? Okay, over to you, Councillor Vickers.
I see my leader's hand has gone down again. Okay, it's not really my portfolio, but it struck me when I was reading the papers just before I came in. Paras 513 and 523 all refer to child protection issues, and understandably, the reporting of these has picked up considerably since the end of lockdown. And on page 76, 77, there are some tables showing graphically where this is going. I just would wonder, where we are compared to our peers. Is this the national pattern, and what impacts is it having? What action are we taking to deal with this?
I'll let Councillor Burke come in there.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. And I referred earlier on to my questions to the public, members of the public, some of the things that we're doing. Yes, there has definitely been an increase in inquiries to our front door, the CAS front door in children's services, and there's been a consequent increase in referrals and incidents. So we are working very closely with partner agencies. Our own social workers are targeting or trying to support the families that we think are at greatest risk. There's an awful lot of work going on.
Thank you for that. I must have missed the answer you gave to the public question.
I was referring to there was a question around support for emotional and mental health.
I suppose that is linked. Yes,
it's all linked.
Yes, it is. Yes, I see.
The problem that our children are facing are amplified by their home circumstances.
And the way their parents are responding as well to
when we talk about inquiries and referrals to our children's services, that's the extreme end of a spectrum, which starts with anxiety in the schools.
Thank you both. And you mentioned it was a national picture, and unfortunately, Councillor Vickers, it's reflective of the national picture that we've seen this. What was being potentially hidden over the last 18 months is now coming to the surface and coming out more and more in different areas. So it is very much, I think, online with the national picture as well. And I know there's a lot of work being done. I was reading a report by Children's Commissioner the other day about this sort of what's happened over the last 18 months and what will need to happen going forward.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I heard the same.
Thank you, Leader, because this is a very important point. Last year, our psychologists, our professionals were warning us that there was a hidden problem. So we have been preparing ourselves for the realization of the concerns that were being expressed last year. So I hesitate to say that we're well prepared because and that could appear to be complacent. We're very concerned about the situation, but we have planned for it.
Thank you all. I have no other hands in front of me, so I think the recommendation is to note the report only. So there's no vote on this evening's report, and we will see this report coming back for quarter twos in due course. Therefore, we can move to item 10 on our agenda this evening, which is members' questions. I'd like to thank all of those members that have submitted questions for this evening's executive meeting. Please note that in accordance with the new processes, you will not need to say I asked this question standing in my name. Your question will appear on the screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but please remember that that must be to clarify the response provided and not to introduce any new business. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questioners have more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all other first questions have been asked and answered, and there is sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note that the time limit for members' questions is restricted to 60 minutes. And if your questions have not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days of the meeting. The response is given either verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the council's website. I therefore invite Councillor Ross McKinnon to answer Councillor Adrian Abb's question A on the agenda.
Sorry, Councillor, Council Leader, sorry, point of information or order, I suppose. A couple of my members who have got written questions, sorry, it's Councillor Dillon, if you can't see me on the screen.
I can see you.
Yeah. A couple of our members, I think, are in the waiting room waiting to answer. One of them is Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Royce Longton, but they've been having IT issues as well. So it's not through their fault. So if officers can bear with them, and if not, maybe if I can just ask their question for them, because they are here. It's not that they're not trying to not.
I've seen them in the waiting room, so that's fine. Councillor Dillon will enable them to come forward, and if they struggle, we'll let you take the question in their name.
Lovely, thank you, Leader.
Okay, therefore, can I hand back to you, Councillor McKinnon?
Yeah, thanks very much, Leader. Costs associated with the demolition contractor have not risen beyond the price originally tendered for the works, but there are ancillary costs associated with the fire and added emergency security. Firstly, extra HERAS fencing costs of £1,200. That's associated with site security immediately post the fire. Secondly, additional material sampling post-fire to check for asbestos prior to the emergency demolition, which was £400. The test happily proved negative. And thirdly, a £6,000 loss associated with fire damaged and destroyed metal sheeting, which had been used to secure the building prior to the fire. It's intended to recover cost items 2 and 3 from the council's self-insurance policy, whereas item 1 for the HERAS fencing is not recoverable. Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor McKinnon. Yeah, not surprising, I guess. The supplementary really was going to be about seeking compensation, because my understanding was that the lock was left off the door, and therefore surely we would be seeking compensation from the person that left the lock off.
I think you may be referring to a previous incident. I'm not sure it's possible to say that at the time of the fire the lock was off the door, but we'll consider your comments and investigate.
Thank you very much.
I would note as well, this is still subject to a criminal investigation, so there's very little further details that we can give at this moment in time as well. Can we move on therefore to question B on our agenda, which I understand Councillor Barnett is here. Are you here, Councillor Barnett?
I'm here in reality.
In which case, I've got Councillor Hilary Cole is going to answer for you, and then you'll have the opportunity of supplementary. We just need to change the question on the screen.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Ryan. Safe drone use is regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, Air Navigation on 2016.
Sorry, point of order. Has Councillor Cole got her mic on?
I'm sorry, I haven't. I'll start
better.
again. Safe drone use is regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, Air Navigation Order 2016. The new drone code is available to download at http dronesafe.uk. The advice includes registration, assessing use around height, congestion, intrusion and collision risks. Where the Public Protection Service receives complaints of this nature, the complainants are referred to the CAA, whereby they are able to submit a concern or complaint to them. Where there are intrusion or privacy concerns, complainants should contact the police using the 101 number and are directed to do so. For noise-related complaints, local authorities have powers to take action where justified under the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. To counter antisocial behaviour, that behaviour has to have a detrimental effect on the quality of life of those in the locality, be of a persistent or continuing nature, and be unreasonable. This excludes annoyance. The threshold for statutory noise nuisance would not be too dissimilar in as far as there would need to be both an unreasonable amount use of noisy drones and that such noise prevents an individual's normal use of their own property. To date, the council has received one unsubstantiated noise complaint in November 2020 of this nature linked with Newbury Racecourse. And the council doesn't hold information submitted to either the CAA or to the police. I'm sorry that was a lengthy response, Councillor Barnett, but I hope that's given you the answer that you need. But do you have a supplementary?
Thanks very much, Councillor Cole. It's obviously very similar to the answer that Newbury Town Council received, because a similar question was submitted to Newbury Town Council Planning and Highways meeting some weeks ago, because it was obviously a problem of trying to get it into the next full council or executive of West Berks in the timescale, so it was easier to go the other way. What I would say in regarding supplementary, I think it's very useful information that you've fed to me and obviously for the community at large. The only thing that concerns me a little bit, and I would try and get some advice if I could, is that when it's a case of a drone above and somebody is feeling that it could be snooping on them or keeping an eye on what's going on, and some people could well be suspicious, even actually notifying these various different bodies. By the time that they've taken action, it could be a case that the drone has disappeared. So I think that's the only concern I would have is instant response. So it is perhaps food for thought. That's all I would say, Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. I share your concerns, because some years ago, a neighbour of mine had a drone which caused no end of issue, and I've raised the point at the chief constable's address to council about 3 years ago, and he was absolutely nonplussed as to what could be done with regard to drones. I know this legislation is now in place, but I think it's very difficult, because, as you say, they're there 1 minute and they disappear. So unless there's somebody around to actually deploy something to disable the drones, it's a difficult one to please.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, in which case can we move to Councillor's question C, which is Councillor Martha Vickers to Councillor Richard Sumner. Is Councillor Vickers with us? I didn't hear you, sorry, Councillor Vickers.
She's unwell, as I found when I got home an hour before the meeting, but she had already reported that in, she told me, and said that she'd asked if I could deal with the question in her name.
Could we give her a written response? Because we've got an awful lot of questions here this evening, and I don't think we're going to get through them. If we get through them, I'll take it at the end if we've got time. But if we can give her a written response, I think that's the fairest way to get through those that have attempted to attend.
Fine.
Can we therefore move on to, it's actually your question next, Councillor Vickers, which is
it's my shadow portfolio too. But
Still you, still me. Councillor Vickers, thank you for your question and for clarity of other members and for residents watching. I should say that we've agreed that I will answer a slightly different question, which I believe is what you were meaning to ask, and you've had that conversation with our officers. The actual question then, for clarity, is how much money has been collected from developers in relation to the Newbury Car Club since it started, and how much of that was unallocated at the time the council changed its service provider from Code Wheels to Enterprise in August this year. The response, therefore, is the amount collected by the council from developers in relation to the car club is £22,880.42. This is since the start of the car club in January 2016. The funding is allocated to the residents' use of the car club from particular developments where we've collected the money. To date, none of this money has been passed on to a car club operator because the developments are either yet to be occupied or the current occupants have not made use of the car club as of yet. The funding remains allocated for the purposes as set out in the legal agreements. Contributions connected with the development have been sought from and secured through the Section 106 process in relation to the car club. Contributions are only sought in very specific circumstances, an example of which is the conversion of first or second stories above a retail premises to a small number of residential units, where it is not possible to provide the required level of parking within the plot, but where it's considered to be an appropriate use of the building. The amount of funding requested relates to the providing free membership to occupants of the development and some free hours of driving credit in order to help establish habits in the use of the car club. For larger developments such as the Market Street redevelopment, the provision of car club services for new occupants of the site is written into their travel plan, and a commitment given of a certain level of service to operate over a prescribed length of time. Whilst a number of contributions and commitments to car clubs have been secured through the planning process, a limited number of developments have been built or triggers passed for the collection of any relevant Section 106 funding. That's the reason for the figure given not being any higher. Do you have a supplementary?
That's very useful. Thank you. As the person who I like to claim got the car club idea going in Newbury through the racecourse development, I've followed it with interest and was a bit surprised that this change of contract happened without a member involvement, and so I haven't seen the papers. What I hoped to get out of the supplementary, and you've hinted at it through the details in the contract, which I haven't seen. What are we obliged to do with the money that we collect off the developers? I understand it's not very much so far, and I understand the reason why that is. But I was concerned that we had in effect got some money as a kind of dowry, which will end up being to the benefit of the new contractor. So is this to pay for the cost of providing dedicated car club spaces? Is it to pay for subsidising the membership?
I think your question is, what are you obliged to do with the payments? So it's one supplementary.
Yeah, well, basically you've alluded to the details
Am
of
I right? That's your one
what the
supplementary.
obligations are on the sides of the contract.
Councillor Sumner, are you able to answer that one supplementary?
Put that back on. In all truth, I'm not able to answer that in any further detail than I've given you already. I think noting Councillor Vickers-M's question beforehand and your later question, I think it would be useful to have probably an offline conversation with you to just be able to have all of those questions and go through the process that's followed. I'm content with the process that's been followed, and I'm content that the money that's been allocated for future use will go to the right place. I don't think anybody is going to lose out on this unfairly, which I think is what you're.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop it there, and we're going to move on to the next question because I think you've had an ample opportunity, Councillor Vickers. Can we go to item E on our agenda, or question E on our agenda, which is Councillor Cottam to Councillor Sumner. Is Councillor Cottam with us?
He is indeed, Leader.
Okay. Over to you, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Cottam. I suppose my initial thought on this is that I'm looking at this as something which could have been raised through our report problem site. The detail behind it, specifically in relation to Floral Way, most of the cycle. Sorry?
I have done so.
Okay. Specifically in relation to Floral Way, most of the cycleway footpath here is cut by this council. The grounds maintenance contract provides for 2 flower cuts per year, an early cut and a late cut, avoiding the main bird breeding season. Thatcham Town Council are responsible for cutting back this route on land under their control. As regards urban roads, generally the adjacent landowner is responsible for keeping vegetation clear, and where vegetation encroaches the council's highways officers will contact landowners and ask them to keep the routes free of vegetation. Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Sumner. Yes, I do. The land is that adjacent to the road, Floral Way, and within the fencing of that area, so it's adjacent exactly onto the road. So I would assume, please tell me if I'm incorrect, that this is our land. I'm talking about the area to the east of the road, not the cycleway, but the actual road itself. And I have actually raised this point, and because the shrubs and such like on Floral Way were already beginning to overgrow and infringe on the road. And after a couple of contracts, it was eventually done, but again, it is now happening again. What I'm asking about is, does this council have a programme of preventative maintenance concerned to road safety of cyclists and motorists? So the actual...
Councillor Cottam, are you asking if we own that land, or are you asking about...
Well, I'm making an assumption that we do, yes.
You're making an assumption. I think, is that the supplementary? Are you able to answer that, councillors?
I'm not able to
No,
answer.
that's not really the supplementary.
Well, could you actually ask what the supplementary question
Well,
is?
I think, Leader, the supplementary is probably the next question from Councillor Cottam.
Okay, we're getting to your next question in due course, Councillor Cottam.
No, it's not.
Okay, what is your supplementary?
I'm asking, do we have a preventative programme of maintenance on shrubbery that actually infringes on the road, causing road safety issues?
And I think I've already answered that in saying that the grounds maintenance contract provides cuts twice a year. If there's the suggestion is that the cutting back is not harsh enough, then that's something that I'm happy for officers to take up with the contractor.
It appears it hasn't been done. So please, if you would come back to me on that, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Happy to do so.
Thank you both. Can we move on to item F on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Macro to Councillor Arderwater?
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Macro, for your question. So we've conducted 2 on-site surveys since the booking system was introduced in May 2020. The first survey was done in July 2020, and the second one was done in June 2021, i.e. this summer. No survey has been undertaken outside of the 2 HWRCs. However, we do receive resident feedback ad hoc about the booking system via our social media channels. The surveys were conducted on site with actual site visitors who mostly had experience of using the sites before and after the introduction of the booking system. It's worth noting that only residents who have access to vehicles and have actually used the booking system can reasonably be asked to give an informed opinion about their use. This is consistent with the approach taken with our annual HWRC customer satisfaction surveys, which are typically conducted on site around the same time of year, so that results can be suitably compared against preceding years' information to look for any trends. It's common practice for local authorities to conduct HWRC customer surveys on the site because it involves engaging with the relevant audience. Do you have a supplementary question?
Well, yes. In the normal course of events, I can understand that. But in this case, if somebody had difficulty making a booking or couldn't get a booking, they wouldn't actually be surveyed, and they, I would imagine, wouldn't be terribly happy. So would you not accept, really, there should have been a more general consultation before this system was made permanent?
So I think you're implying there, Councillor Macro, that there are people who have not been able to get booking or access to the HWCs because of the booking system. And frankly, I refute that. I'd welcome any evidence of anybody you know who has had a problem. As you do know, we have a telephone customer contact centre who is able to handle and arrange bookings for people who do not have internet access. But again, the relevant people who have used the booking service to access the HWRCs have been surveyed, and the response we've had to surveys to date has been overwhelmingly positive. Over 87% of people want to keep those booking the booking system. It avoids queuing, it avoids unnecessarily extra visits to the HWRC, and so overall it gives a better experience for the resident and for the local environment, in particular other road users. Thank you.
No, I wasn't saying that people were unable to use it. They may well have been, but we don't know.
Can we move on then to question G on our agenda, which is Councillor Longton to Councillor Arderwater. Is Councillor Longton with us?
He is with us.
works, yes.
Okay, over to you, Councillor Arderwater.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Longton. So the majority of residents have been using our online system to book slots before visiting the HWRCs. Bookings are reasonably easy to make and can be done on a variety of devices, including laptops, tablets and smartphones. A small number of residents who may not have access to the internet can and have been phoning the council's customer services team for assistance with bookings. Alternatively, residents without access to the internet can use public computers available to do this booking. Do you have a supplementary question?
Councillor Longton, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Arderwater? Okay, in which case we'll move on to item H of our agenda, which is Councillor Pattenden to Councillor Arderwater.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Pattenden, for your question. The decision to introduce the booking system was taken following discussions at gold and silver council meetings during spring 2020. This was after the whole country went into lockdown and prevailing guidance was that people should avoid all but essential journeys. Since then, the booking system has helped the council to deliver the HWC services in a safe and efficient manner for both residents and staff. Until recently, residents have been limited to only a single booking per week to ensure that as many residents as possible had a chance of getting a booking within a reasonable period of time. And this is because the amount of available bookings had to be constrained to allow suitable social distancing on site. Again, as I mentioned in my response to Councillor Macro, the booking system has been overwhelmingly popular among site users, and this has been borne out by the 2 on-site customer surveys we've undertaken. The use of the booking system has been kept under continuous review by the Council's waste management team and our contractor. Many aspects of the booking system, including regulation of the number of slots available at specific times, are operational matters which are informed by events on the ground and the duty to provide a safe service. The recent removal of the restriction of 1 single visit per week was implemented by the waste team following an assessment of evolving government guidelines and after obtaining feedback from the waste contractor and key internal stakeholders. And it is proposed that the situation on the ground is monitored every few weeks before a progress review report is presented to the council about the effects of removing this single visit. I should add that I personally, as I've said previously, I welcome this relaxation. And I do acknowledge that previously a small proportion of residents will have been inconvenienced by the need to ration their visits. It's important to state that the pandemic situation is changeable, and if the situation evolves, we may need to reinstate these, but I'm very confident that this will not be necessary. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Pattenden?
I do. Thank you for that lengthy answer, Councillor Arderwater. Yeah, my Lib Dem councillor colleagues have been lobbying a lot and put a lot of pressure on the executive to relax the once a week visit. So, but there doesn't seem to be much of a press announcement or publicity made of that to the general public. Is that something that you could publicise more widely?
Councillor Pattenden, we have advised the public of this change. I am confident that residents who do wish to use the HWCs more than once per week have taken opportunity, have taken advantage of this. So I don't feel any need right now to further advertise this change. People who need that relaxation have taken advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you both. Can we move on to question I on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Owen Jeffrey to Councillor Arderwater.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Jeffrey. So the council took the decision in spring 2020 to amend the HWRC opening hours at both Padworth and Newtown Road to 9 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night every day of the week, apart from Thursdays when the Newtown Road site can open for a longer period and close at 8 p.m. during the months of April to September. In other words, summer months when there is more growth in people's gardens. And this change represents an overall increase in HWRC access for residents across the district. It's not been feasible to operate the extended summer opening hours, that is till 8 o'clock at night on Thursdays at Newtown Road during the pandemic period. And this has mainly been due to staff availability constraints. Some frontline contractor staff have had to go into shielding or self-isolation at various points during the pandemic period, and our contractor has had to use available staff in the most efficient manner. It's been a very challenging period to try to maintain frontline waste services, and you'll be aware that this council and many other local authorities across the country have had to suspend various frontline waste services, including selected curbside collections during the pandemic. And I very much hope that as the pandemic situation becomes better and eases in the coming months, we will be able to implement the extended summer opening hours at Newtown Road facility. Do you have a supplementary question?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Councillor Jeffrey.
You can now. Thank you. My goodness gracious, I think we've all forgotten what the answer was now. Right. Well, Councillor Water, thank you very much indeed for your answer. But I think what I'm going to ask you is, please, will you give a commitment that you will restore the hours to what they were, if not more, as soon as it becomes practicable? I absolutely accept, obviously, the issues that there are staff that are not being able to be at work because of COVID and pinging and all the rest of it. But I would like to hear that you're giving a commitment to go back to the longer hours, and if at all possible, to go to even longer hours at the HWRCs.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
So, Councillor Jeffrey, thank you for that very good point. I'm not comfortable to give a cast iron commitment or guarantee here in this meeting. I'm certainly keen to do that, as I've said, and I do agree with you that it would be a very good thing if we can. So I'll consult with officers, and as soon as this can be done, we will do so.
Thank you.
Thank you both. We can move on to question J on our agenda, which is Councillor Dillon to Councillor Steve Arderwater.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Dillon. So as my previous answer to Councillor Pattenden included, like many authorities in the country, this council has had to constrain the number of visits during the pandemic so that suitable social distancing could be maintained on the HWC sites in the interests of health and safety. The reduced availability of slots meant that we needed to implement an approach which would give as many residents as possible the opportunity to secure bookings within a reasonable period of time. The restriction of one visit per week was introduced for this reason by this council and many other local authorities. That restriction has been recently removed, as again I've mentioned to a previous answer. And once more, our waste team is constantly monitoring traffic flows through the site, and we have recently increased the number of slots available. It's worth mentioning that many English councils, including our neighbours in Hampshire and Reading, Wokingham and Bracknell Forest, continue to keep the restriction on their sites of one HWRC visit per week for their residents. And again, we will continue to review this and will relax as far as possible in the coming weeks. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Arderwater, for the answer there. I think actually, in fairness to the question and the timing cycle, that we accepted the once a week visit, But we were obviously asking for you to lift that at an earlier date, in which you did. And so that's the framing of this question, and it's just the timing of your decision to open it back up to more than once a week once this question was already in the system. But you've made reference in some of your previous remarks tonight as well, talking about residents almost having to justify additional visits, yet it's their council tax that pays for this service. So if you are going to restrict it, that's actually a cut in service. So we would implore you to keep the HWRCs open for as many visits as a resident may need. We're not to determine what they're doing that particular week in their life, which neighbours and which community members they're supporting, and why they would require more visits. So I think please refrain from doing any further reductions unless obviously operationally for COVID is absolutely required.
Yes, so thank you, Councillor Dillon. I slightly resent the implication that you think we are rationing out something which is resident to their own. Of course, all services this council provides are funded by residents, and I totally concur with you that we should always treat our residents as our customers. But the simple fact is, regardless of COVID or anything else, access to a fixed site, a fixed number of vehicle bays along a road is always going to be constricted. There's always going to be a trade-off between the convenience to somebody of being able to travel as many times as they wish versus the convenience to and safety of road users because many of their neighbours are queuing. So this is it's not an unfair imposition to place on residents as you suggest. But I likewise wish to make this as convenient and as accessible a service as possible. Thank you.
Councillor Arderwater, you can have a short break now. We are going to question K, refreshingly, which is Councillor Brooks on a totally different subject to Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, Councillor Brooks. I hope you're well. The Economic Development team is in contact with Vodafone regarding the use of office space at their headquarters in Newbury. We are aware that the site is currently open with reduced capacity, and that Vodafone employees are being supported as they return to the office. We will keep these communication channels open as we monitor the short, medium and long-term effects of the pandemic on West Berkshire's major employers and the local economy. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Brooks?
Well, thank you for that. And I was in a fabulous mood. I've spent all day at Warwick Castle with my grandchildren. That fabulous mood is now evaporating as I get these answers. However, you mentioned the economic team. I'd really urge you personally, the leader, our new chief executive, our interim chief executive, to have good lines of communication with Vodafone, meet with them regularly as our largest employer, enormous company in our midst. And all I hear is our economic development team meet with them. We should have much better communication with them and much better understanding of their ambitions and their intentions going forward. And I don't see that happening. Could you get that up your priority list, please, sir?
Thanks for that, Councillor Brooks. I rather think that's an unfair characterisation of the reality of our engagement with our major employers. It's quite proper for our economic development officers to take the lead in communicating with our larger businesses and for members to take an involvement if and when necessary. Further than that, I would add that I think any commercial enterprise which is engaged in full and open discussions with the council are entitled to expect a degree of confidentiality of those discussions as well until such time that public disclosure is appropriate. So I would intend to hold to that principle too. Thanks.
Thank you both. We therefore move back to you, I'm afraid, Councillor Arderwater. So question L on our agenda this evening is from Councillor Abbs.
Right, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Abbs. So, as I've said in previous answers, the booking system has helped us provide a safe and efficient service in recent months. It's been good for the environment, and it's making a small contribution towards the reduction of carbon emissions and improving local air quality, particularly leading up to Newtown Road. On-site queuing and vehicle idling has been minimised, and at the Newtown Road facility, there's not been the backing up of site traffic onto the A339, which at times was a safety hazard for motorists during busy times, such as bank holidays. We've not seen any evidence that the booking system is stopping people from recycling their waste. Bookings continue to be available at both sites for residents within a few days of checking. Available data shows that between May and July of this year, 96% of available appointments were booked at the Newtown Road site and 93% of available appointments were booked at the Padworth site. While people have been doing fewer site visits, they have been using their visits more efficiently to bring more waste. Our data shows that visit efficiency, measured using tonnage of waste delivered per visit, has actually increased by 52% between June 2020 and March 2021. Likewise, there is no evidence linking the introduction of the booking system with fly tipping or burning of waste. Fly tipping incidents increased across the country during the pandemic, and most fly tipping is undertaken by rogue traders who do not want to use licensed facilities so they can avoid making required gate fees. Fly tipping is a crime, as you're well aware, I'm sure, and decent law-abiding citizens do not fly tip. I cannot comment on the specifics of Wiltshire County Council you've referred to in your question because I don't have enough information about their local situation. What I do know is that many other councils around the country, including our neighbours in Hampshire and Reading, Bracknell Forest and Wokingham, are continuing to use booking systems for managing access to their HWSEs because of the benefits associated with their use. Do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Councillor Walters. That's an interesting response. As you know, I've talked to you about hybrid systems in the past. The CO2 one's a complete red herring, and I'd like you to really go in and demonstrate to me how on earth you've come up with that number, considering that recycling has dropped, the tonnage has been reported by officers to other members has dropped, percentage of recycling has dropped. All the numbers that are coming from the officers to members show you call it plateauing. I see it as even a 1.5% drop as a drop. I'm completely confused by your answer, and I'd love you to focus on the one bit of demonstrating how your CO2 number is in fact less because you recycle less.
So sorry, Councillor, we're obviously at different places in terms of statistics and numbers. I don't have access to the numbers you've had. Perhaps we should compare notes after this, but just very simply, again, I'm confident that fewer visits, vehicle trips and vehicle journeys have been made, and an increased amount of waste has been delivered to the site. Arithmetically, that means a more efficient delivery of waste into the site. But again, I'm very happy to review the data you've received and compare it with my understanding of the situation.
I think we should, because we're getting different information. Thanks.
Thank you both. Can we ask if Councillor Barnett would like to come in and present question M standing in his name? Again to you, Councillor Ardwater.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Councillor Barnett. The one visit per week number was based on an assessment of the typical number of visits undertaken by an average household and the maximum number of slots that can be released while facilitating suitable social distancing on site. You will find that most local authorities who have introduced measures to manage customer demand in recent months have usually restricted visits to one per week. And again, as I've said in previous questions, many councils, including our neighbours, do continue to keep a restriction of just one visit per week for their residents, which, once again, we were able to relax in recent weeks. Do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Councillor Ardwater. During the summer period, there is a lot of household alterations, and many people do actually have a good spring clean, if you like to call it, as well as a good sort out when there's more available time. And therefore, I think majority of people wish to have that opportunity to get rid of more rubbish. Can I ask the question related to that? Does that mean that there's been more rubbish dumped in the vicinity during certain periods of the year?
I'm not quite sure that's a related supplementary, if I'm honest, Councillor Barnett. Are you able to answer that, Councillor?
Well, yes, indeed, and appreciate you've just been outside the room, Councillor Barnett. But as I just said to Councillor Abbs, there's been no evidence other than a national uptake in fly tipping of rubbish being dumped in the vicinity, and so I think maybe you're implying that people have not been able to access the HWC often enough, and so they dump waste very close to their houses or here. I don't think is borne out by the facts.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. Okay, and apologies, Leader, for being here in person, but I'm another person that's suffered through IT problems tonight.
No.
Luckily, I'm within a mile of the council offices.
Okay. Can we move on to question N then, which is Councillor Cotton to Councillor Sumner?
Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Councillor Cotton, for your question. The council has an annual footway improvement programme, which has this year, 2020-21, been supplemented with additional funding to encourage cycling and walking across the district. Details of the programme can be obtained through our officers. If you'd like me to speak to Andrew Reynolds and ask him to provide you a copy, I'm more than happy to do so. The council undertakes a programme of routine safety inspections, which takes into consideration all aspects of the highway, including overhanging vegetation. If considered to be a hazard under the Highways Act 1990, the council will issue a nuisance and obstruction letter to the landowner requesting the vegetation is cut back. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, just first a point of information, Leader. These are both the items I'm discussing are owned by West Berkshire Council. Let's clarify that, because eventually, after I had intervened and pushed for some action, they did eventually do that. Now, I'm glad to hear that there's an intervention can be done on Floral Way for the roads. I'm very glad to hear that. And I would suggest that maybe Councillor Sumner actually do that because it is getting bad. Now, I was talking about particularly a footpath that, if I can remember, it's a junction of Foxglove and Cowslip. And basically it was horrendously overgrown. And I asked for it to be cut because I had complaints from local residents that it was becoming unpassable. Now, what I'm asking for is not what you're doing to improve them, or what are you doing to look after the footpaths that we currently have? Because I was told by the relevant department within West Berkshire that they would have to put in a bid for this, and that no, they weren't normally cut back. And I had to wait for a month or more for an answer whether this would actually have a successful bid by a contractor to cut it. What I'm saying is, surely we should have a preventative maintenance program where we actually cut this back. So that's the question. We have an inadequate system. Are we going to do things to create basically a better service, to improve this service? Because
that was a very long supplementary, Councillor Cotton. I think it's the same as the first one. As do you have a preventative programme?
No,
Councillor
Leader, it is not at all. It is totally.
Councillor Sumner.
I can't add any further to the previous response I've given. In all honesty, I've said on both responses that we have a programme. That, as I understand it, is the question. That, as I'm reading it, is the question.
You have not answered.
That is the response.
I've asked, is there a programme?
If you'd let me speak, please. You've had your opportunity.
Councillor Cotton.
Well, then I'm very disappointed you haven't bothered to answer my
could the
question.
host please silence Councillor Cotton to enable Councillor Sumner to speak?
Thank you. So, as I said, you've asked about improvement programmes. You've asked about whether there's a programme in place, and the answer to both of your questions has been yes, there is. If you have specific cases, which from the confirmation you've just provided you do, then I'm happy to pick up and look into those individual cases. I've got no concerns with the programme that's in place. We manage an inordinate amount of hedge cutting back, of roads and of pavements. It's a detailed programme, and I am happy, as I said, to provide a copy of that programme to you if you don't already have one through Andrew. If you've got specifics that you want to get me involved with, then I've got no concern with you doing that. I'm happy to receive an email from you, the same as I would be from any other member of the council. If you're not getting the responses from officers that you believe you should be getting, all the responses, then I'm happy to try and prompt a quicker, faster, better response for you.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Can we move on then to question P on our agenda, which is Councillor Vickers. Again to you, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question again, Councillor Vickers. Executive portfolio members, myself and my deputy, were updated on the request for quotation exercise in relation to the car club in regular monthly meetings that we have with the service director and relevant officers. The process was carried out in accordance with the rules, and since this was not a withdrawal of the service but a procurement exercise and not a change to the service, there was no consultation with members of the car club. The outcome is decided on the merits of the quotations received in accordance with the scoring against the evaluation criteria. The assertion significantly more expensive company is not accurate. There is more to consider than simply the hour rate that is paid by users. User rates that are below cost would effectively be subsidised by the council, therefore taxpayers. In any event, Enterprise are making good sign-up and free usage credits available to new and transferring members through to November 2022. The car club has to be financially sustainable and ideally grow to serve more people in Newbury and expand to other locations across West Berkshire. This will help to support our growth plans for the district in a more sustainable way in line with our environment strategy. Growth of the car club in Newbury to become financially sustainable is something Co-Wheels did not unfortunately achieve. Enterprise have ambitions to significantly grow the car club during the contract and have a record of success in doing so. This was evidenced during the procurement process by references from the relevant local authorities where Enterprise currently have their operations. There are other benefits to members from using Enterprise: adaptive vehicles for disabled drivers, discounted access to Enterprise car club vehicles across the country, for example, when they're on holiday, use of the mobility as a service schemes, combining rail, bus and car club use that Enterprise partners in, for example, the Highlands and Islands can access. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. This car club at the moment, the Newbury Car Club, really only affects about 2 or 3 wards in Newbury, and none of the members were made aware of that. And most of the members representing those wards were unaware of this change happening. So when their residents contacted them and said, "What's going on?" we've had a look at the deal with Enterprise, and although they're happy with the free transfer in the first year deal, longer term, the cost to the user, the end user, our resident of belonging to Enterprise Car Club will be greater than continuing with Co-Wheels. I'm not arguing that the contract for the council isn't better, but I do think there should have been more member involvement. And as Shadow Transport portfolio holder, who happens to also live in an area where there are lots of my neighbours that are members, I would have expected to be able to answer the questions that local residents and neighbours are answering, and I wasn't able to. So I have asked officers to let me have sight of some of the documentation that is in the new contract. I want to promote this new contract because what I'm told verbally by the officer who used to run the car club is that it's much better, and I hope that's true. So can I please be granted the favour? It seems to be I have to ask for this as a favour rather than as a right, of details of what this contract is, because it very much is it's a direct from this company to particular residents that are our constituents, and we as their elected representatives should know what this contract involves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I know you've had some information shared with you. I don't know what the full detail of that is. I've seen emails go out this morning and I haven't had a chance to read through them yet in detail. If that hasn't got the information that you are looking for, please come back to me and we will have that conversation. Happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, we're back to you, Councillor Arderwater. Can we have Councillor Q, question Q on the agenda, which is Councillor Cotton?
Thank you again, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Cotton, for your question. Firstly, I should point out that the term you use in your question, green bin tax, is a misnomer. It is not a tax. There is a optional subscription service which we require payment for. It is not a tax. Anyway, apart from garden waste subscriptions, other payments that can be made using direct debits are council tax and business rates. And these payments are managed by different schemes and using different systems within the council and have different processes around them. It's important to state that the payment of council tax and business rates are not discretionary. Again, households and businesses who are liable to pay do not have the ability to opt out. Whereas again, as I said in my introduction, garden waste service is an opt-in service and residents can choose whether or not to subscribe. Alternative options are also available for residents, including home composting or taking garden waste free of charge to the council's household waste recycling centres. Other important distinctions are that the garden waste subscription rate is comparatively a significantly smaller amount and payment is made at the point of subscription, usually in advance of the service being delivered, whereas the other two payments can be made in arrears. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, just to intervene, for Councillor Cotton is no longer in the meeting room. I'm sorry I didn't highlight that before you read that answer out.
Okay, in which case we'll move on to the next question, please, which is Councillor Brooks to Councillor Arderwater.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Brooks. It's unclear from your question which restricted service you are referring to, but I'm going to make a wild guess that you're talking about garden waste collections. So assuming this is correct, please note that discussions are ongoing with Veolia. It's worth mentioning that achieving uninterrupted frontline waste services has been very challenging for many councils, as well as ourselves, during the pandemic period. And this has been due to various reasons, including contractor staff self-isolating, shortage of HGV drivers, increased tonnage of waste presented at the curbside during lockdown periods and after the Christmas holidays. Service disruptions are continuing, regrettably, in many areas across the country. I'm unable to provide further details about ongoing discussions at this stage due to commercial sensitivities. Do you have a supplementary question?
Well, thank you for that. Ongoing discussions when these restrictions, and you have admitted yourself that there was restricted services, necessarily part of them because of COVID. This started in May 2020 when services were restricted. It is now September 2021 and you say there are ongoing negotiations. Now, there must have been a service level agreement on the minimum service that Veolia would provide. And if they've not achieved that, then commercial reality should mean that they give us some rebates. Have you looked to negotiate such, sir?
So thank you again, Councillor Brooks. So again, assuming we are talking about garden waste, you mentioned services a couple of times. I'm not aware of other restrictions.
HWRC, sir.
HWRC, okay, HWRC, right. So it'd be a very difficult legal question, and I certainly wouldn't want to go into it here, and it certainly would be legally challengeable that the force majeure event of a pandemic means that Veolia should ignore that and pay us lots of money because we people have to use a booking system. I don't accept that we have restricted access to the HWC at the numerous.
You admitted it earlier. You admitted that gold and silver.
Councillor Brooks, I think that Councillor Arderwater has the opportunity to answer you. I think what we will do is we will move on to the next question. Thank you.
Oh, so
which is Councillor
Tony
Vickers.
answering a question. Why have you done that? Why have you done that, Leader?
Because
I asked.
I have told you, Councillor Brooks, I have done that because you are cutting across him and not letting him answer the question. And if we want to start talking about disorderly behaviour in a meeting, I'm happy to go down that route. But as chairperson of this meeting, I'm moving the discussion on as you're not interested in listening to the answer.
From your administration. Thank you.
Can we please move on to Councillor Vickers? Which is question S to Councillor Arderwater.
Yes, so thank you for your question, Councillor Vickers. Our sites do not accept commercial waste. We've already been operating an effective car and van permit system for years, and this helps us minimise abuse of site access by road traders and commercial operators. The restriction to one visit per week, which has recently been removed, was applicable to residents. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. And it's not a supplementary to the question that's on the screen, which is the last question. Sorry, I was so thrown by seeing the wrong question on the screen. I don't have a supplementary. I think we've gone on long enough about this, actually, but it's been difficult when the wrong question comes up on the screen.
That we will agree on, Councillor Vickers. Yeah. Okay, I believe Councillor Brooks has question T on as the final question for this evening's discussions. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you again for your question, Councillor Brooks. And just to confirm, this is about the cost and effort of providing a telephone contact within the Waste Department. So the residents, again, can now book as many visits as required, and most of the residents do these booking themselves. And as I've said previously, this is very straightforward. A small proportion of residents who do not have access to their own device or the internet can call and have been calling our customer services team, not the Waste Department, for assistance with bookings. These costs are part of the centralised costs for the customer services team, who also help residents with a wide range of other queries. It's not practical to provide broken out costs per service, but I can tell you that no additional staff hires or, as far as I'm aware, hours of payment have been made. So there, as far as I understand, there are no extra costs to providing this contact service within the customer service team. Do you have a supplementary question? You may still be muted.
I was muted by the leader, I think, for my behaviour. I've used this service. I've got through, well, I actually finally got a call back from a nice lady who looked to try and help me with bookings and extra bookings before you lifted the restriction, but didn't tell anybody. So what she said was the once a week restriction was to try and restrict commercial operators, which flies in the face of what you just said in the last question. I'm just totally confused by the way you are running your services, sir. It's inconsistent and contradictory.
Thank you for your observations, Councillor. I don't detect a question there, though.
I'm asking you to clarify that when one of your operators says the restriction was to restrict commercial operators, and you said you don't take commercial waste.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I think I'm with you now. So exactly as my answer stated, my original answer, I think it was to Councillor Vickers, my memory is getting a bit faded now on these numbers. We do not accept formally commercial waste, but of course it's easy for a man in a white van who is in reality a commercial operator to maybe pretend to be a resident. I think that was the intent, while not having spoken with the councillor officer in the services team who you spoke to. I think that is the intent, that the risk, as it were, to residents being able to access it has been from people who may want to abuse the system, and those are formally not commercial operators, but may in practice and in other places definitely have been actual road traders and commercial operators. Thank you.
Those are the ones you were trying to restrict to once a week.
Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. And that concludes the members' questions for this evening. And we have actually had the full hour, Councillor Vickers. So I will ask that Councillor Martha Vickers has written responses. And I think we've probably covered the car club ones through the discussions that you've had with Councillor Sumner. So that ends the business of this evening's meeting. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for their attendance. I therefore close the meeting, just with a reminder to members in the room to stay in your seats until we are told that we are no longer live streaming. So thanks everyone, please remain seated.